Welcome to the Maverick Paradox podcast, where we explore what it is to be a maverick and discover effective modes of leadership. I am Judith Germain, and my mission is to propel the maverick mindset into a world where character and integrity will ultimately have a higher premium than personality and bureaucracy. So thank you for joining me on this journey. If you would like to continue with me, then please subscribe to my podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or one of the other popular podcast platforms. And today, our guest is Maurice Watts. Maurice, tell me about you.
Started out life as a techie, did a degree, went into sales engineering, went into training young people, then went into marketing in about 87, and I've been in marketing ever since.
A lot of people think marketing is a waste of time. What's your views on that?
I think marketing is absolutely core to the way a business runs and indeed the strategic direction of the business. Most people confuse marketing with promotions because they think it's about adverts and websites. It's actually about promotions, sales, research and development, distribution, finance, the marketplace and the future. And those all interact. So if you're running a business, any of those that goes wrong or isn't working properly will sabotage the business, and any two of them will probably kill you. So it's absolutely vital. I regard it as the engine room of the business. So if you're not paying attention to it, my view is probably dead man walking.
But what sort of leadership is
But I would say that as a marketer, wouldn't I? It will tell you how your customers view you. The numbers, the finance bit, which is not about accounts, it's about finance, will tell you what your ROI is, what it's costing you to go to market, what the strike rate is, and all that stuff. Well, if as a leader you don't know those things, you don't have them on your desk first thing Monday morning every week, how on earth do you know how well you're doing? And how would you know?
Are you saying that if someone's
how would you know what to do next?
Then they're not really showing strategic leadership for their business?
As a start point, I don't think they're even running it properly, let alone strategic leadership. And I think that if you're not gazing over the horizon, because the thing is this, everybody operates in a marketplace of some nature or other. If you're not looking over the horizon at what that marketplace is going to be doing, then at some point your organization is no longer going to be effective in its marketplace, and I would say at all. And the point is that the marketplace will change daily or weekly. And the number of clients I have who say, well, all of a sudden it's not working, but I haven't changed anything. So the strategic leadership bit is, are you tracking it? Are you setting things up in advance? For example, the product or service you're doing now may well at some point go commoditized, in which case the margins are low and so on and so forth. So the question is, what are you going to do when that happens? And by the way, you should have started doing it months ahead of that event. Otherwise, you're going to suffer dips in margin, dips in profits and so on. And frankly, as a leader, for me, that's unforgivable.
I seem to acquire quite a lot of marketing clients to help them with their own business. Issues I find is that they're not able to define what it is that they do themselves in a way that gets them more clients. Do you see that as a typical thing for marketeers or for everybody generally?
I think it might be an issue in people who call themselves marketers, because many of them don't cover the whole gamut of those things I've described. They're in one very small niche. For example, they work with websites, or they work with apps, or they work with PR, or they work with advertising, which are typical. If you don't look at the whole set, and my version comes from places like Harvard and Ashridge and Henley and so on. If you don't take that strategic view of marketing, then of course you'll struggle. Any business would, and marketers are no better than anybody else. If you don't see the whole picture, and if you're not indeed looking for the whole picture. So it in a way, it doesn't surprise me. I've met marketers that I'm not sure should be called that, but that's perhaps a narrow view.
Would you ever class yourself as a maverick?
Well, I've always regarded myself as different, so I guess the answer is yes. I certainly I certainly seem to see marketplaces and situations in ways that to me are blindingly obvious, and nobody else has seen it often in years. And people say to me, "Wow, where did that come from?" And I'm sitting there thinking, "But it's blindingly obvious. Why doesn't everybody else see it?" So it may well be that I'm a maverick and not yet.
One of the things.
Well, actually, I have discovered it, but until recently, it didn't occur to me that such a thing was.
They can see things at least 3 months, if not more, out, and quite often they are before their time. So what is blindingly obvious doesn't become so too many years later. It can be a frustration. How do you use your maverick tendencies to help your clients?
I use it. I use it to spot the way forward. If I'm working with a client who, let's suppose their marketplace is suffering and they need to know what to do next, I seem to be able to look at what they can do and what they might be able to do with very little modification, and then spot a marketplace that isn't necessarily even anywhere near what they're doing now, but nonetheless where their set of skills and resources will be a really good fit. And I'm kind of, well, why don't you do that? You could do that.
Yeah.
Well, yes, but that's not in our field. So what? It'll save you and make money is fairly typical for me. Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I mean, okay, you have to make it work, and you have to make sure that it really is applicable, and you have to make sure that that marketplace really does exist. So it involves all the normal stuff like testing it and doing the analysis and so on. You can't just have an idea and jump. You have to do the background stuff. But without it,
looking at your website,
I don't know where they would be. Dead.
Zen cafes. What's that?
Zen cafes is what the business cafe would have been 15 years ago, and I have documentary proof. We came up with an idea that said, if you want to commit to an ethos that says you will trade fairly, ethically, ecologically, and above all cooperatively, we would set up a building, if you like, a hub where we invited people from a number of trades, IT, accountancy, design, graphics, and so on, and somebody who could make and produce coffee. So it might be a cafe or it might be a building where we set up a cafe. The idea was to recreate Lloyd's coffee shop circa 1760, where you walked through the door and said, "Guys, I'm taking a ship to India." And people said, "Well, I can take part of that and I'll do that," and so on. So we wanted to recreate that. But the problem was finding people committed to the ethos, and secondly, finding people who could spend time sat in a cafe without necessarily as much resources to run their business as they needed.
Too soon, isn't it? Because
now we had the idea probably 10, 15 years earlier than the business cafe.
Getting a lot of business people together just to sit and chat and then see what kind of things come up. That's a lot of forethought.
We ran one. The idea was that they should be international, by the way, so that if you wanted to start up a business, you could walk into a Zen cafe anywhere in the world and say, "Guys, I want to start up in this country," and the Zen cafe would be able to launch you immediately. So we had one we got as far as we had one in Bristol. We had one in Prague for a while. We were looking at setting one up in Bucharest. And when the owner said, "Yes, this is all very well, but where's my advantage in this?" we realized that they just didn't get it. Because the whole point is collaboration. It comes back to games theory. The cooperators are the ones that will survive in the long term. The competitors will eventually die out. It's as simple as that.
And some Mavericks and a few Generation X's. But then you've got the old guard that's still trying to find a competitive route. And it seems to be a bit of a tug. And I thought at one point we were definitely moving down the collaborative route, but with all this kind of angst about who owns this and countries becoming a bit more xenophobic and things like that, it's becoming harder to have that model.
I don't know. At 70, I'm not sure that I qualify as a millennial. And I've always seen cooperation as the way forward. And I've tried to work with organisations that see it that way. Now, I found that might also be my maverick tendency, except that for me it just seemed the logical way forward.
Socialised mavericks by default work collaborative. And I think that may be the part of it, that you're right, you're not quite a millennial, but you may well be a socialised maverick. So so collaborating is something that's seen as normal and makes a whole heap of sense. And I think though for some people getting their head round true collaboration is quite difficult.
Well, the other thing I would say is that on a serious note, I am of course a baby boomer, born in 47. Slap at the beginning of it all. And we if you're going to take generalizations about age groups, which is appalling, but if you were, we are the generation that tore the world apart. We changed the way music works. We changed the way society works. We changed all sorts of things. Probably because we suddenly found ourselves free of all sorts of things that had restricted our parents. And we just collectively went for it. And if you look at the number of us my age who are now climbing Machu Picchu and going windsurfing and diving and doing all sorts of things that are only supposed to be for people half our age, or maybe a third of our age, we don't see it. We're getting on with it. I mean, I took up tango 6 years ago, and the number of people my age who are fanatically into it, and it's difficult. It's not the easiest of dances. And yet, here's my generation just going for it flat out, even now.
And it's important to look behind the trend. But I think that, the old corporate power network is crumbling in a sense of organisational structures of what will work now. I mean, as you say, with the internet. I mean, as you mentioned, if the internet was what it is now, the Zen cafes would have found it a lot easier back then.
Sure, it would indeed. We'd have had a lot more traction, and I'm always amused by people reinventing things, and I happen to think that the Zen cafe model is even better than the present one, but the present one is surviving. If we'd had crowdfunding available to us, we would have them now certainly all over Europe and the States as a start point, and maybe further, because that's all we needed. By the way, you're talking, at the corporate level and these thought patterns and things. One of the things about big corporate world is the tendency towards silo thinking. Now, I've always hated it, and I try and abolish it when I'm working now with people, getting people to look outside the box, getting people to say, well, just because you see it that way doesn't necessarily mean the rest of the world does. And the way the silo thinking comes about is within organizations. Each people have their own little empire. But I talk to people in small businesses about using big management tools like SWOT and PEST and wheel analysis and all sorts of things. And people say, well, excuse me, but those are the big companies and we're small. And I'm saying, but if you make a mistake, it's much more important than if they do. And then the next thing they say is, yes, but I did that at college, or I did that on a management course or whatever. And they've got that knowledge in a silo that says, this was college, now I'm in the real world. And of course, the reason colleges taught it was you're supposed to use it in the real world.
Interesting.
And this putting things in boxes and staying within them just drives me nuts. It's so destructive.
One part of what they're doing against another. But I also find, like you have said, that when you work with clients, you look and you say, these are different revenue streams that you could follow. And I think it's quite often when you talk to people about their skills, they give you a functional skill set that they would have used in a corporate. And you're like, yeah, but no, seriously, what is your skills? And you have to work hard with them because they don't see, but to begin with, they can't see it besides a corporate heading, which is quite sad because, as you said, it's very restrictive on growth, restrictive on the individual.
Well, my period in the iTech, which was part of a special case YTS, taught me about something called transferable skills. And so I look at a whole list of what people can do. And then, as I said, I see things differently. So I look at all the other places those skills could be deployed. But in all of this, and in all of this giving advice and so on, I'm always mindful of John the Baptist, whose message was very good, who delivered on his message, who delivered everything you'd expect, and ended up with his head on a platter just the same. And I think there's probably a background lesson in there somewhere.
And they wanted to become a teacher, but they didn't want to really retrain, and they didn't really want a drop in salary. And I said, well, why don't you take those skills into training and become a trainer? And she was so shocked because she had never considered herself a trainer. And it's like, but it's the same as teaching. It's just different people. And I get that's what I say, that people can get very rigid in their thinking.
Yeah, I think I'm reminded of the late Richard White, who said, "You have to tell your story," and I think that is so
Richard
true.
Provided
You know,
quite a lot of lessons,
and
I remember
I suppose for a lot of people, they haven't even thought about what their story is, let alone how to tell it.
And his soft selling skills and my leadership skills, and putting them together and saying, you know, this is how you lead, and these are the soft selling skills that you could use, and which was a great way of looking at sales and looking at leadership in a different way.
Yeah, and I think this brings back the point about collaboration. I too learned a load of stuff from Richard, and I too redeployed a lot of it, especially in terms of how do you do an elevator pitch. And when I'm working with new leaders, and they suddenly discover they have to go and network and they have to go and present and so on, I still use his model as a background. But again, isn't that yet another collaboration?
Sometimes when people leave the corporate, because when you're in a corporate environment, people teach you things because they have to, because it's part of the environment that you're in. And I think when you're going to become an SME or a micro business, a lot of people think they have to do it on their own, so they don't necessarily seek experts in other areas who can either collaborate or they pay, to work with to actually improve what they're doing. And I think, in some respects, that is a lack of leadership, a lack of foresight on the individual, by assuming that they can do everything a corporate can do themselves.
Well, what inspires me about Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, and Richard Branson, they all openly say that they like to hire people who are brighter and better than they are. They don't get all defensive about working with people who are better. That they embrace it, and I think that is a key skill in a leader, to realise that your ego has to take a back seat to the needs of the business.
Especially socialised mavericks do feel
so often the businesses are ego driven, and then they fall over.
To work with people and you're comfortable with your position, so you don't worry about hiring somebody that's better than you at something, because you know together that you'll create something fantastic. And I think conformists get more concerned. So I can't have this guy, and he's been doing marketing for 15 years. He knows more than I do. It should be a great thing, really.
Yeah.
Wow, yeah, I think that's a great place for us to stop now, Maurice. So, thank you for coming on, and would you come again?
It's been my pleasure, and yes, of course I would. I'd love to. Thank you.
Thank you once again for tuning into the Maverick Paradox podcast. I hope you have enjoyed listening to my conversation with Maurice as much as I enjoyed having it. If you would like to learn more about Mavericks and leadership, then please subscribe to my podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or one of the other popular podcast platforms. Alternatively, apply to join the Maverick Paradox exclusive Facebook group. My website is maverickparadox.com. Find out how willful independence can ultimately change all our futures. Thanks again, and see you soon.